Welcome everyone to this special webinar event this afternoon in Cape Town, South Africa. We welcome you all from all over the world. It's amazing that at this time we are, even though we're locked down, we're able to connect in this very interesting way of connecting with one another. The opportunities that COVID has created are really wonderful for us as colleagues across the borders, across the seas and across disciplines. So we are really delighted today to be discussing a special project of ours. These are the things that sit with us, this book. Before I go into that project and the event this afternoon, I would like to welcome you all and ask you to please, on the chat screen, to just say hello and tell us where you are, who you are, where you are from, just so we know who we are connecting with across the globe. So that's the first issue of housekeeping. The second issue concerns how you ask your questions. You'll see at the bottom both the Q&A channel and the chat channel. For asking questions during Q&A time, please ask your question, post your questions on the Q&A section of that of the screen. Now, sometimes Landi, who is working behind the scenes, controlling the technical aspects of this event, she invites people to come to be face-to-face with the audience, or to face the audience and to be visible on the platform. And so when you ask your question in Q&A, please indicate if you would like to be promoted, is the word I believe she uses, promoted to the panel, so that you are part of the panel and you can ask your question from the panel. Thank you so much. We can see that people are beginning to post and to say hello. Don't forget to tell us where you are from. So this morning, this afternoon, we are discussing the digital websites that we have created based on the book that I just showed those of you who are continuing to arrive. The digital exhibition that is called Through the Eyes of Survivors of Apartheid is based on this book. These are the things that sit with us. It's a book that is co-edited with Mariki, who is part of the panel today, Ulufsen, and a senior postdoc in historical trauma and transformation, and in collaboration with the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, which is headed by Stan Henkerman. But the person representing IJR, the Institute in this book, is Friederike Bubenza, who worked with us on this project for a period of 2 years or more than, just a little more than 2 years. We are delighted to have among us this panel of people who have been very intimately involved with the project in a range of ways. First, let me introduce perhaps myself. My name is Pumla Gobodo Madikizela. I am the research chair in historical trauma and transformation at Stellenbosch University. We have been, for the past 5 years now, we've been 5 years or so, we've been involved in thinking and writing about historical trauma. We have used the past few years to really try to deepen our understanding of the legacies of historical trauma, especially in South Africa and in the wider African continent. What these legacies are, what the transgenerational impacts of these legacies have been. We've been interested in this question, but not only in understanding the impact of trauma, but also trying to understand and deepen understanding on what is the impact of these histories on the people who are implicated in these historical traumas. In other words, the beneficiaries of apartheid privilege. How have they responded? What are the dynamics of their responses, both in terms of what is visible and what is in their internal worlds? This is part of what we've been doing. Ultimately, we're interested in how do we engage in these conversations in a way that is transformative. So part of what this project is about, this digital exhibition, is precisely to respond to that invitation to engage with these stories, with these histories in a way that is transformative. And I think that this quest for real engagement and real transformation continues to be important for all of us in South Africa, particularly in an era where there is so much denial of history, a refusal to face that past by people who have benefited from it, who tend to want to look into the future and turn their back to the past. Whereas the survivors of these stories, of these oppressive laws and colonial policies and histories of colonialism, the survivors very much want to stay in contact with this past. They cannot forget. They want also acknowledgement of this past. I know that for us who have been involved in this project, these are the things that sit with us. The storytellers in this book, who are 29 people drawn from a larger compendium of stories. I know that they are sitting out there. We have made arrangements through Historical Trauma and Transformation to have 3 people in Langa, each of them in Langa, in Bonthavel, and in Worcester. In Langa, Thandeka Toleni is helping us to bring people together to watch as we are presenting this afternoon. Shahid Isaacs in Bonthavel is helping us there, and Russell Cupido in Worcester has been organizing groups of the people to come and watch. So they're watching there, and we welcome you. We give you a hearty welcome, and we are very pleased that you have been able to join us. Now, on the panel, we have Dr. Mariki Olufsen. She's a former journalist, and she joined us at a Historical Trauma and Transformation about 3 years ago. And over the 3-year period, she's played different roles, and her current role is a senior postdoc fellow. She's been leading this project. She is the curator of the digital exhibition, and she will tell us more about that process in a moment. Dr. Nancy Rushahora she is in Tanzania right now. She's also a senior postdoc fellow. Nancy is participating as a co-principal investigator with colleagues at Exeter University on a large grant from these grand challenges, UK grand challenges, and their work is looking at curating memories in 5 different continents. And Nancy is based in Tanzania, and their work is titled Imagining Future Archiving. And so she will tell us a bit more about that. She is right now, as we speak, in Tanzania, working on this project to establish some of these memories into museum spaces. Bongani Mgijima, a very special friend and collaborator since we arrived at Stellenbosch University over the past 5 years. He has invited us to work with him. In fact, this exhibition, if it were not for COVID-19, would have been at the museum, the Stellenbosch University Museum. Bongani Mgijima is the director of this museum, and he's been leading critical conversations, using the museum space to lead critical and difficult conversations about our history. It is a wonderful pleasure for me to introduce 2 young scholars who have been so engaged with our project, not only in terms of conversations, but also in a scholarly way. They have produced the first, and this is now Dr. Sakiru Adibayo, who is fresh out of his studying of PhD, now is a doctor, and is already making waves with publications, articles and scholarly articles that he's publishing. And Manosa Ntunya, who is also in this field, working at the intersection between psychoanalysis and South African literature. Both of these young men have been so impressed us that we are always inviting them to come and to think with us. And they have produced this wonderful review of These Are the Things with us, that sit with us. And we posted that review on our website. And so it's a real wonderful and heartwarming pleasure that you are always available to be with us, to sit with us as we think through all the complicated aspects of this work. So thank you. You're going to hear from them in the second section of our work, of our conversation this afternoon. They will introduce the photographers, Butswele Mokotlane and Noncedo Gqekwa, who really are the reason we have an exhibition at all. So, but they will be introduced by Manosa when the time starts. Mariki, I want to begin with you because you really, more than any of us, you've been on this journey with this work, with these stories since we started. You have been involved in interviewing the storytellers in this book. When the book was published, you were the one who was leading the team of people to bring the book to the storytellers. When we decided to have this exhibition, you were the one who, together with me, we went to Worcester and we went to Langa and Bonteheuvel to share this digital archive, digital exhibition with the storytellers. You've been the one who's really been in the forefront of this work. I would like you to tell us about what did it take to put this together? Can you share with us this vision of transformation, using this as transformative moments, sites of transformation? What, in your view, does it mean for the storytellers that their stories are used in this way? Mariki.
Pumla, I think I want to start, and I told Butswele that I'm going to do this, so it isn't a surprise, but I want to start with a quote from Butswele Mokotlane, who's on the panel with us, when he talked about the work that he did for this book. And he said, behind every photograph is a unique story that is told if we pay attention. And I think there is so much in this quote that talks about the kind of attention that it takes to get to where we are now, 4 years since we started this research project. And a lot of it has to do with paying attention and to be intentional about paying attention. And I think it started with the way that the research project was set up, that it was thoughtful, and that the fact that that you brought on an organization like the Institute for Justice and Reconciliation, who already had established relationships with individuals and organizations in these 3 communities, made a huge difference to the way that we could find the entry points into the communities. There were also other aspects of the research project where there was attention paid, for example, to match interviewers with interviewees in terms of language, in terms of age, in terms of gender. And this all sounds like obvious things that researchers should pay attention to. But I've also been involved in research for long enough to know that there is that intention and the willingness to do that, but it takes a lot of resources, and it takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of patience, and sometimes that there is a trade-off between that intention and other responsibilities. So I think what made this project a strong project to start with is that paying attention was sustained. And that helped, for example, when we started to conceptualize the book, and we the engagement that we had with the storytellers from the beginning, where we started to share drafts with more than the 29 people who are in the book, where we went back to talk about what it means to be featured in a public, in such a public way as we envisioned that the book would be. Um, you, me, and Friederike had many engagements with the storytellers. Some of them in the end didn't want their stories in the book, but it took relational work. It took building of relationships to um, to to convince the storytellers themselves of the importance of this work. And I think throughout this time, it was important for us, and we tried our best to remember that these are personal stories. It names places, it names people, and the intimacy of the stories make storytellers vulnerable. And it was important to keep the trust between us as the conceptualizers and the curators of the book and of this platform to be mindful of that, that vulnerability. And I think that made it easier, that relationship that was built from, that had the foundation from 2015, 2016, when the research project started. If that foundation wasn't there, it would have been very much more difficult to get where we are today, with the buy-in of the storytellers, with the storytellers with us, willing to meet with us, willing to talk to us, willing to be very open to us about their experiences of seeing their stories in the book and now seeing their stories on the website.
I think this is such an important, what you just said now, the buy-in of the storytellers is so important, because it gives us a sense of legitimacy that what we are doing it together with the community of storytellers. One of the things that was very critical for us in this work was really moving from the idea of research as something that is done only in academic circles. I mean, first of all, it's important that we are doing this at Stellenbosch University. These stories are brought, even this website, being, located as a website that is located at Stellenbosch University is very important for our history. But more importantly for us is that when we started this project, we wanted a way of reporting our research that goes beyond simply, the publication of articles, the reporting to one another as scholars. We wanted a project that will be brought back to the storytellers themselves, the people who gave us their stories. And we did this not so much just to say, we brought, you tick a box, you've sent the book back or the thesis, back. We wanted it to be a continuous engagement. And this, we have succeeded in doing this. From the moment when we launched the project, we went to all of these areas, to Bonthaven, to Langa, to Worcester, to launch the book and to have people come and respond to us, telling us how they felt about holding the book in their hands, how important it was for them. And now again, with this iteration, there is this sense that we are continuing with this idea of engaging with the community. And again, for us, this is very important because it shows the importance, the power of this, of this communication, of going back to the community, not simply to go back to hand over and leave the book, but to continue thinking with them. How do we create this? Now, one of the things that you're going to share with us, I hope we have the time, is how we are, part of our vision is to have younger people engage with this work as research, but not just research for research's sake, but to help them to grow in understanding, to deepen their understanding, to connect with this past in a way that will help them to think about, what does it mean? What do you do about it? this is our goal. And I think we are achieving this because we brought young people. There are young people from the arts department at Stellenbosch University. We look forward to your sharing with that towards the end. But while I will leave you now, Mariki, and I want to go to Nancy. Now, this project is about curating violence, curating violent past. Now, what can you tell us, Nancy, because you are doing with your colleagues at Exeter University, you are doing exactly that in not just in Tanzania, you know, in your country. There are colleagues in Beirut, there are colleagues in Ghana. What does you know, this idea of curating, as Erica Lera says, curating difficult knowledge, this idea of bringing violent past into these public arenas, what does it achieve? What does it do to the people who are carrying the memories and their descendants? Can you share with us your own work on this? You are muted, Nancy. Can you open the mic? Open the mic, Nancy. You are muted.
Yeah, thank you, Prof. Thank you so much. And really, the process of archiving these stories and memories of trauma has brought to light a lot of areas that you wouldn't have achieved if you have concentrated on research alone, as Mariki has mentioned. And it has made us to work with different people, government officials, youth, and scholars, as you have said, in different countries, to try to understand the process of archiving from the museums and archives to the local level at schools, at communities and villages, how memories could still survive in a landscape that was traumatic in the past. So in the process, we have discovered archives, colonial archives, which remained closed even after colonialism. This archive is not only a desire or demand from the researchers alone, but also the communities who are aspiring to know what these missionaries archived in these buildings. We have also learned about stories that young students tell about colonialism and the trauma involved, and how they have used and actually sometimes abused the landscape of trauma. And when I say abuse, I mean neglect completely these memories and all structures that are linking them with colonialism. In the process of archiving the memories, we are aspiring also to establish a memory center in one of the regions that has been marginalized in the country. You can say that it's one of the poorest regions in the country. But in terms of history, it is very, very, very rich. And it is here that officials have accepted that we can establish a memory center. And by this memory center, we mean not only a site that will stand as a museum exhibition of tradition, of customs and memories, but also it will stand as a space of dialogue, whereby even the students during our preliminary research or preliminary or pilot project, they use the prison space to enact some of the activities or some of the trauma and torture that were done by the German colonialists in Tanzania. So in this way, you find that a museum or memory center become a space, not only of memory, but also of legacy of colonialism in that country. And we are linking it with other spaces like Badawi camp, whereby these sites of trauma, the refugees are still living in these sites of trauma. We are trying to see how these past and present relate in that project. And it is also the same with Syria and Ghana, trying to make this cross comparison. And I'm sure even the digital archive that will establish in Stellenbosch will also tell the same stories in South Africa and elsewhere.
I find this incredible, this idea of, young people enacting these memories. I think that it serves, doesn't it? Serves the purpose of acknowledging this past, because so often these pasts are denied. We had, for instance, here in South Africa, the example of the former president of South Africa denying that apartheid was a crime against humanity. And when someone in an official position denies the existence of the past, it is this challenging problem that we face in all of these countries with a history of violence, the problem of denial, not just by the leaders, but by people who benefited from this past. And so what you've just described to us and what we're trying to do is really, in a way, bearing witness, right? I mean, is it not true that part of what is important about these traumatic and collective memories is how we partner with survivors of these traumas to force the public to face these stories and to remember, not to forget, so that the role of these archives that you described, of what you're trying to do here with the digital exhibition, is really to show, to bear witness, to work with the storytellers and people who have suffered trauma and their descendants as people who will bear witness. We're creating this space, we're representing this past, so that no one can say it did not happen. As we have seen, as you describe in your country, where these archives are still locked up. In other words, it's a locking up of memory. Thou shalt not remember, therefore they put it under lock and key. But now you're opening that up. And the effect of that, I want now to talk to you, Nancy, but also to Wongani. When you open up the space of the museum for this kind of engagement, what Nancy describes as a way of opening up the space for a confrontation with this memory, what role does the museum play? Your museum is existing, it's been involved in these processes. Nancy is emerging. Can you share some insights with us? What have you observed when people come to engage with these stories? What do you observe?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for inviting me. And let me first congratulate you and the team for putting together this thought-provoking exhibition. I think it's one of those exhibitions that if it was in this particular museum, it will have actually provoked a lot of discussion. And I'm happy that we've taken this discussion online already. This kind of exhibition, you mentioned the curation of violent past and the possibilities of what this kind of exhibition will do in a museum space in terms of provoking those discussions. I know that the exhibition is based entirely on storytelling, narrative of lived experiences. I must hasten to add that these kind of experiences in the past would have been ignored in museums because museums were not really concerned about the lived experiences of individuals. They were more concerned about the stories of great men and women, the generals, and the like. And also museums have also been almost obsessed with objects. And I read in this catalog the quotation from Ellen Kuzwayo about holding on to stories because you don't have anything else in a material sense. And the stories are the only thing that you kind of own. Chair, if you may allow me to answer your question indirectly, by linking it to this particular exhibition in terms of what possibilities it brings to a museum space. I think storytelling, when it comes into a museum space, offers the possibility of healing. In isiXhosa we say when you mawunesilonda uyasithunuka nje kancinci wenzela uba mawuphile. So if you have a wound, you prick the wound so that you get healed. So storytelling actually assists us as museum practitioners to begin to think differently about the museum, possibly as a space for healing. If I were to give you one example of a tour I conducted in one museum that I was involved with when I was still younger, which is a hostel in Strand. After I took a group of tourists through this migrant labor hostel, one of them came to me and said, Bongani, what do I do now? Because the stories that were told here have actually traumatized me. What must I do? And then I realized that we should probably think differently about the museums, as you say, curation of violent past, as spaces for healing, as spaces where people get there so that their wounds could be pricked, so that they could be opened, so that the healing process could actually happen. So the other possibility when an exhibition like this comes into a museum space, it allows the storytellers to actually remember. It also allows them to also actually forget. Because we know as humans, we don't want to think about the same thing all over again. We want to get on with our lives. So that if we want to remember, we can always go to the museum and remember whatever the historical incidences. So it does allow the process of happily and voluntarily forgetting, not forgetting with the purpose of forgetting totally, with the knowledge that the memory is kept safely in an archive. In the case of Nancy, in the case of a museum, is kept in a museum. And sometimes in the case of memorials like that we see every day, the act of looking at a memorial as a form of remembering, so that when you don't want to remember, you can rest assured that the memorial will do that job for you. So I think storytelling does have that possibility of assisting people to move on with their lives. It also has an emancipatory possibility. Having voices that were suppressed in the past being heard. And in this particular case, the storytellers are not only being heard, they are also being seen because they've been documented and now, as you say, like bearing witness. So then the exhibition itself becomes a witness to that traumatic event. So the other possibilities, Prof, when an exhibition like this comes into a space like a museum, is the possibility of restitution, the possibility of restitution of memory, and the possibility of affirming one's dignity, that my individual experience, it does matter. It is part of the bigger narrative of the nation. In museums, normally we would like to work with big stories from Jan van Riebeeck to Forster, that kind of narrative in a chronological order. But individual stories don't work like that because memory doesn't work like that. So it actually affirms that stories are in themselves histories. It's also a form of symbolic reparations, as Makuzwa says here, that when you actually have nothing, at least there is something that you can hold on. You can at least hold on to your own stories. It also offers the possibilities of democratizing the museum space. I've mentioned before the issue of a single story, one narrative of the nation. But when you bring stories like this, they are very different stories. They come from different geographical areas. It kind of creates a kind of various narratives as opposed to one single story of a glorious struggle against apartheid that was led by great men and women. That in between there, There were ordinary men and women like the ones that we hear about in this exhibition. So in that manner, then it kind of has this possibility of transforming the museum into a dialogic space, because then people began to remember their own stories. Because as I was going through the book, I began to think about my own life history, about my own lived experiences. So that when an exhibition like this comes into a museum, I can also tell my own story. So it has that possibility of opening up other stories that were not heard before. The other possibility is that, I hate using academic words because I'm a museum professional, but this issue of epistemic justice, that the storytellers are actually experts of their own lived experiences. And when they talk to their own individual experiences, they talk as experts, they talk as historians, they talk as academics of their own historians. So they are not really talking as native informants who will only be acknowledged in the footnotes. They are actually talking to their own experience. So I can go on, Prof.
Sorry to cut you there, because you've just said something really very important, the idea that, the storytellers are owning, this is their story and they're defining it in their way. I think that's such a powerful observation about this work and in general about people whose stories are brought into spaces like this. I want Bongane, if I may, please, to now, precisely because you've opened these questions for us, the question of healing. Manosa, Adebayo, and us, they've raised this issue. What does healing mean? If you think about these terms, restitution, healing, what exactly does it happen? So I want to start with Nancy and then to segue to Mariki before she shares with us how these stories are impacting the younger generation. But starting with you, Nancy, your own observation, when you describe to us stories and memories that have been suppressed, where people were not even able to acknowledge that these are the things that happened to them. Now you've opened the space up for people to share their stories, for these stories to be acknowledged. When we talk about the impact of these stories along the lines that Bongane has raised, healing, restitution, repairing, what have you observed? I mean, in what way do these stories actually touch people's lives to the extent that the talking about the opening up of the space and representing these histories does something for them? Can you share with us your own observation?
Yes, Prof. A lot of things actually have happened by working with these communities and for them being able to speak about things that they have never spoken before. And in our process, we also took some video and also translated an English version of a thesis into Swahili. So through these two things, I've observed that the community or most of the people feel that their story, at least there is someone to listen to their story. So these memories, most of them are about the Maji Maji War, which was a German resistance against German colonialism in Tanzania. And the Germans have never acknowledged that they actually committed a genocide in this resistance. So the fact that this community could speak about how the resistance hurted them, how they are still suffering from this resistance more than 100 years ago, it gives them at least hope that at least their story could be heard by more people, and at least there is someone at least there to listen about their suffering. And also to the younger generations, they have actually realized that the way they understand these and they use these memories is quite different from the older generation. For instance, most of them prefer music, videos, like I said, rather than the storytelling, which is traditionally the way that these memories are handed down from one generation to another. So like in our pilot project, the students decided to rap all these memories, try to put their understanding of the Maji resistance into a rap song, which they decided to perform at a German prison, a former German prison, which is the space that we want to use as a memory center. So you see that there is a variation between these communities, but also there is a sense of ownership of these memories, and also begging for an ear to listen to these trauma that has been impacting them for longer periods.
Thank you, Nancy. Share with us, Madiki. We have observed very similar responses from when we went to the communities with this book and now with the exhibition. Can you share with us, with the audience? We have 15 minutes, in fact, almost about 14 minutes. And I do want you to share with us one very important response by a young person in the arts faculty. But can you just capture for us just a little bit, you know, what have the responses been from the people in Langa-Ponthavel, you know, and Worcester to these projects? And how have young people, you know, tried to connect with these stories? And if you could just take the stage and take us through to the illustration with this, and leave at least 5 minutes at the end for Q&A, please.
I think, Pumla, for me, as someone, as you said, I was a journalist for a long time, so I consider myself as a person who always have been interested in stories and think that stories are important, and that it's important for people to tell their stories. But I was absolutely amazed at how many people told us that the story that was in the book was the first time that their story was documented in that way, or indeed that it was the first time that they actually told the story. One of the storytellers over and over again told us, and I think the words are so beautiful, and he said, to tell his story helped him because it was no longer possible for him to carry so much hate. And telling his story helped him to get rid of that. The children of storytellers in Bonteheuwel, Langa and Worcester, who told us that this was the first time that they heard these stories of their parents. I remember in Worcester, Juan Karim, one of his two daughters was there, and she was called Zinzi and her sister is called Zinani. And yet, so they carry these names that are so full of and rich with a political past. But Zinzi told me that evening that when she read her father's story in the book, it was the first time that she knew about the demons of his incarceration, the wounds that he carries from being imprisoned for his political activities. Those are just two examples, but I was so amazed at how many stories are not told and how important it is to create spaces where people can tell their stories. But I know we have little time, but I want to say that we should also be careful about storytelling. We live in a time where storytelling is very important and is very a lot of people are realizing the importance of storytelling, and I think it's a good thing, but I think we should also be careful and rigorous in our work to understand what the value of stories are and the value of storytelling is. That people talk about healing and they talk about closure. At one of our meetings with the storytellers before this opening, one of the storytellers talked about reparation. So I think storytelling at least in the project that we are busy with must have a transformative vision. Storytelling platforms like the book, like the website, must have a vision for change. And I think that would be the challenge for this website for the future. And I think that's where the student responses and the collaboration with the visual arts department at Stellenbosch University is so important and interesting, because it also helps with our work, our interest in that intergenerational dimension of the effects of apartheid. So just very briefly, because I would like to show you a practical example of how the students work. So we collaborated with the Visual Arts Department at Stellenbosch, and I want to thank Professor Caroline Perel-Bull for her enthusiasm to give one of the briefs for the third year students. They were invited to respond to the story. So randomly, each of the students got a story, and their brief was to illustrate an abstract comic representing a personal response to the story assigned to them, and then to expand this narrative further in the form of an animation. So I want to share with you one of the students' work, and just some of the quotes as well. So I'm going to go to share screen, and I'll try to be without rushing through it, to also be quick. Sorry, let me just get the.
While she's doing that, I just want to acknowledge all of you who have posted on where you come from. Okay, so that's Mari, can you show the video, the clip of the animation?
Yes, this is just some of the quotes, and I just want to say we are going to have a special event where we're going to we're going to add the artwork to the current website, and there will be a separate event for that. So this is just a teaser. So this is one of the responses. So Alexa Huester was asked to respond to the story of Abdul Basi Jepi. And for those of you who are familiar with the book and with the website, his story is the one called Leaving the Mansion in Asagai Street. He talks about how there was a big family living in the mansion. They had cows, they had chickens, and how they were then forcibly removed to Bonteheuwel. So this is her process work for the abstract comic, and then she works through it. I won't go through the detail, we can do that later. This is then her final abstract comic, and then that is expanded into this into this animation, which I will share with you.
Thank you, Mariki. I cannot wait to have the next conversation. And the first person who came to mind is Tamagab, who has always helped us in deepening our reflection on these kinds of things. This is just so moving. I mean, the images, the colors, and the students paying attention to what it means to be violently removed from one's home, for one's home to be, you know, demolished in that way, and for people to be packed away. It opens up so much. And I really, I mean, as you all know, all of you, well, those of you who've been with this book, Adebayo, Manose, we've worked with Tamagab, and the last conversation was with her and Deborah Willis. So I know she's coming back to South Africa. I mean, this kind of thing is just the stuff that animates her own, you know, deep thinking about these issues. So I can't wait to have her back. I see she's also joined us here. So we look forward to having you back, Tamar, to think with us through. But we've got also these two young scholars who are going to be taking the stage now with their own way of putting this in a context, both in a scholarly context, but also in a representational, to kind of help us think about what is the representational aspect of this work. What does it mean? So we look forward to the conversation. Please don't go away. But I do want to say we have an opportunity for one question. And that person is Melike Furi. Melike is a senior researcher with historical trauma and transformation. He and Wilhelm Verwoerd are involved in leading dialogues on what they call white work. That too is important work that is important. As we said at the beginning, that it's the stories, it's also the responses to these stories. So Melike, I'd like you to share with us, how do you see, as you know, in the short time, very short time that we have, how do you see this work interacting with the vision that you have to get white South Africans to embrace this past in a way that confronts it honestly, rather than denying it? Can you share with us your response to that?
Thank you very much, Pumla. Am I live? This is, of course, no easy question to answer, and there's been such rich contributions in this panel today in answering precisely that. Keep thinking about it. I think maybe the thing I want to share is how different people's lived realities still is, and how different the experiences are. And I think the lack of exposure to our fellow South Africans' lived reality is part of what keeps separating people today. I was in a different seminar this morning on Black Lives Matter, and it was again highlighted how people's experiences differ depending on the color of their skin. And I think these stories really, that's where they come into play, how important it is to immerse yourself in someone else's reality. I didn't see how this important shift can happen in our country if we don't take the time to really listen to these stories and to create time to immerse ourselves in someone else's reality. A lot of my perspective on this is also from my neuropsychology background, in terms of how much of what the brain absorbs is unconscious in our lived environment, and how what we end up paying attention to, as Mariki also said in the beginning of the talk, so very importantly, is what we keep ourselves busy with. So if we're not more intentional about paying attention to stories, going into that deep level of perspective taking, putting ourselves in the shoes of others, I think there's a long way to go. And I also see this reflected in pushback about Black Lives Matter, with people kind of saying things from a superficial point of view of not really engaging with the oppression, the systemic oppression that's still present in our country and many countries around the world. So yes, I think the stories are so important. And what also struck me is the time that is necessary to do this important work, the intentional spaces that we need to create to sit with these stories. And there was a lot of mention about healing, and I think there's deep potential for healing, but as Mariki also said, one also needs to be cautious. There needs to be a relational component that holds the space and receiving the stories. So yes, I'll stop there.
Yes, thank you, Melike. The big question, of course, is what do you do about it? You step in someone else's shoes, and what do you do about it? I think these are on perpetual questions that we have to address about what really is the action side of thinking and reflecting, and in our country, especially where, you know, social justice requires action. You know, it's important. The starting point, of course, of feeling with the other, connecting with the other is critical. But most importantly, particularly in our country where there is a huge gap, you know, between rich and poor, the inequality is still so strong. The question is, how do we engage with this question of, you know, action for social justice? And this is the test, really. Our test is whether we get there. There's one question that
can I respond to that quickly?
No. Let's. Can you respond on the chat? I want to read. There's one question from someone who says, "I wonder then if it is necessary to reenact these violent pasts when, in my opinion, as a person born post-apartheid, I think that I genetically inherited the trauma and pain. Can we not remember these violent histories without performing the violence, without getting re-traumatized?" I'm going to ask Adebayo and Manose to answer these questions and then to take over the stage as soon as they finish answering this question. Did you get that question, Adebayo? Could you, it's someone who's a young person who says, born after apartheid, I've inherited this past. How do, you know, the question is, you know, I think I've inherited this trauma. Is there a way of remembering without performing the violence of the past? So I'm inviting you to be the ones to respond and then to take over the stage.
Thank you so much, Professor Pumla, for that, and for everyone who has you know, contributed to this wonderful workshop. So how do I remember without being re-traumatized? That's a very, very important question, especially when it comes to issues around intergenerational trauma, and it's one of the questions we're even opened. We actually have it there to ask to the two of our photographers, and so I probably won't go into details now, or maybe I should just leave it for the photographers to answer that question, because we actually have it here to ask them that question. So I don't know if that is okay with you, Prof.
Absolutely, it is okay. I think it was a way of segueing and handing over the virtual microphone to you and Manosa.
Okay, I'll just let Manosa start.
Thank you very much, and thank you to everyone that has contributed to the discussion so far. It's been quite illuminating, even though difficult, because of course, when we talk about the history of a country or the history of a person, one never knows how they'll be affected or what might be remembered and the traumas that might still live with one. So it's been really illuminating to go through. These are the things that sit with us, but also to be in these discussions as well. Now, on the question of trauma and remembering and not reenacting the past, I think the first thing that has been acknowledged by most people that have spoken is that it's important to firstly acknowledge that there is the specific history that we have and that it has affected us in certain ways. Therefore, for me, it would start off with first acknowledging the impact of the past in the present. And secondly, perhaps acknowledging that trauma is something that, we live with, but the question is, how do we live with it in a way that does not debilitate us, but allows us to perhaps use it in creative ways to envision different ways of being in the world. So for me, that is how I would think about memory, about the past, and attempting, as it were, to create a future of possibilities, a future that is not closed up by what has happened in the past. But now I would like to introduce the two photographers that participated in These Are the Things That Sit With Us. I really think that, as Prof. Pumla and Dr. Marichi have said, there would be no exhibition were it not for the photography or the photographs that are contained in the book. These Are the Things That Sit With Us. Extremely striking. I think, you have yourself, going over them and, over and over again, just trying to read the images alongside the text that they have. Really striking. Now, introducing the photographers, we have Noncedo Xekwa, who is a freelance photographer from Cape Town, and she studied photography at the Cape Peninsula University of Technology. We also have Utswele Mokhotlane, who is a freelance photographer in Johannesburg. He studied photography at the UOMS, if I'm saying it correctly, UOMS Cape Town School of Photography. So really, firstly, congratulations, guys, for the work that you were able to do here. Extremely important stuff, but also very striking in the best tradition of what we expect photography to do. But just in terms of your biographies, just to start with you, Noncedo, how do you come into photography? What led you to it, or what inspired you to become a photographer and to think that, when I go and study, I'll actually study this medium? What led to that?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the question. For me, I guess it's stories, because stories are all around us, but at the same time, the stories that we saw that were out there, they were not necessarily reflective of us. So perhaps it was to have a part in creating stories and archiving and making sure that we're not just saying we're not represented, we don't exist. So that was my small part in it too. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Noncedo. And for you, Butswele?
Can you just repeat that question again? Sorry.
How did you decide to, what made you decide to become a photographer? What is in your biography that made you think that it's a medium that you'd like to work with?
Okay, I think for me, first of all, I would like to say thank you guys for this opportunity. I think when we started, I didn't really think that it will be this big, in terms of the book and the museum and So, and also I'd like to acknowledge Noncedo. She's been a great partner in this journey, and professors and Marike as well, and the rest of them all. I think for me, actually, I'm from what we call this editorial photography. I'm not really into a documentary. I think when I was given this challenge to actually document the book, it was something that is quite unique for me. So I had to sort of like rewire myself. And I learned so many things about Cape Town and Cape Flats as well as a community. So yeah, I think I've experienced warm hearts, I've experienced warm families, and I've experienced a good mentorship, if I may put it that way. So yeah, that's all from my side.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And one of the things that has been mentioned by Pumla and Marichi is that when they were looking for photographers for this specific project, they intentionally looked for young people who are you guys. So I would like to know about the process of your selection and how it was working as a team. What did you learn from each other? Were you surprised by the ways that, by how you both individually, I suppose, approach photography? And what is it that you say you took from each other, if there's anything? Noncedo, we can start with you.
Yeah.
Um, for me, what I took out, so it was a lot of planning because we both lived in town. We lived in town, so we're not very familiar with the places, and there were issues of safety and stuff. So it was planning and making sure that we are safe. But apart from that, it was just trusting each other and working as a team. And the most important thing was to think about the stories and think about the people. And what was important is giving the people not the voice, but like collaborating with them and not just, inserting ourselves in their homes and saying we're here to take pictures, but to have them collaborate with us so we could create images that spoke to them as much as that we felt as photographers, that they gave them a dignity that perhaps we don't necessarily experience as Black people when it comes to photographs. So for me, that was a takeaway, like dignity and being intentional in the images that you are creating so that the next generation that looks at these people, they have, as much as there are stories of trauma, but there's something about the images that is strong and powerful and, that's uplifting. So, yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you. Butswele?
Yeah, I think Noncedo mentioned about something about being intentional. I think for both of us, first of all, I like the way we actually communicated throughout the journey. It was just clear as to like what we actually going to do. And from my side, I think my ability to maintain a balance between capturing the past and the present of the photographed people in a very dignified manner. As I was actually studying then, the process of Mariki actually finding us to work together, it was a little bit challenging because I was studying, but they actually gave me enough time to actually get into this journey with both my studies and the project. So I think, yeah, basically being very communicative between Dr. Mariki and Noncedo. That's why I took from this project. And like I said, the warm hearts of the community from Langa and Bondenhevel.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, really fantastic work. No doubt that both of you have a great future in photography. And I personally look forward to seeing what you produce as time moves. Now, Dr. Kiru, I'll pass on to you.
Thank you so much, Manosa. And just to avoid waste of time, I just want to say something about the photographs in the book. And it looks to me like we haven't really discussed at length what the significance of the photographs in those book in that book, the significance of the photographs, because these guys really did an amazing job. And to me, the photographs do not simply accompany the stories. The photographs actually tell independent stories. If you look at them, very closely, they tell, independent stories. And even though we can call it some kind of, documentary photography, what particularly fascinated me, from reading, because I actually read the photographs, I didn't only see them. So what fascinated me about the photographs was the way they were able to traverse like multiple timescales, and also how they kind of animate, ordinary lives and everyday life, in apartheid and even post-apartheid life. So thank you so much for the two of you. And I also like what Noncedo said about collaborating with the people. You were not just taking their pictures, like you collaborated with them. They actually chose the photos they wanted to be in the book, which is very exciting. So for me, I just want to ask like photographic questions, if that makes any sense. And to ask those photographic questions, I'm going to read from the review that Manosa and I did on the book, and then we there was a paragraph on the photographs, and I want to read it and then ask my question from it. So I don't know if Mariki could help me like put up the quotes, but then I will just read it from here. Thank God I wrote it down. So we said that, you know, it is almost impossible to talk about these are the things that sit with us without talking about the photographs. Each storyteller, except one of them, has one or more photos of themselves strategically placed beside, before, or after their stories. Some of the photos are close-up shots, while others are medium and long shots. Some were taken while the people were on the farm, on the soccer field, in the garden, in their living room, at work, and so forth. The photos serve many purposes in the book. Apart from putting faces to the stories, they enable the readers to see the stories up close. They serve as visual testimonies and sometimes a spectral evidence to the presence of the past. So I guess from this, my question is, you know, about the portraits in the book. So sometimes you do like a very close up shots of the faces, like it's right in our faces. We can see like even the wrinkles on the faces and all of that. And sometimes you just do medium shots where we can see them a little bit from afar. So the close-up makes us look at them like very closely. The middle, we are able to see a little bit of the background, you know, what they're doing. Maybe they're in the garden or something. And sometimes it's long shots, you know, takes. And so I'm just interested in why you decided to use these different kinds of shots and what each shot, you know, meant, you know, for you. So any of you can decide to answer that.
Okay, I will go first. For me, I think the close-up shots are very confrontational. There's something about it that makes you uncomfortable and uneasy because you are confronted by this person who is telling this particular story, this trauma, you know, and that is what it is. But at the same time, with this trauma, people have decided to live, to dream. So the guy at the soccer field, that is what he's given his life to. He's giving, so that is his giving back to the community, regardless of the trauma that he has lived through. So there's like this hope, this engagement, this idea of possibilities beyond our traumas. So I think it was trying to be very confrontational, but also just allowing people to see that there is more to these lives. People are able to, you know, find meaning in other ways, even though they still, you know, they are still sitting with the trauma. And I don't know if it's a good thing because it's like you haven't dealt with it, but you found positive ways of being with yourself in positive ways with your community. So I don't know if that makes sense. Thank you.
It does a lot. Like, you know, okay, Botswele, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, no, definitely. I think for me, there's actually one image that actually stood out for me, and it's the one of Koleka class, right? That's the one image that stuck with me until this day. With her hands over her face as if she was hiding from something. Perhaps she was shy, shame, or pain, or tears, or just pure joy, you know? So I think, like what Nonkato said, there's something about giving people freedom to actually stand and pose the way they want to, because that's the only way you're actually gonna find the real stories in their heart, you know, and not being, I don't know, like just try to be organic, and they have to be themselves. So yeah, yes.
maybe also just to again ask on Koleka class picture, which actually is the cover photo, is the cover image of the book. And in under Koleka's story, we don't have our hands covering our face, but here, our hands are covering our face. And what I thought was, okay, the photos are meant for us to see the faces, right? And here she I wouldn't say she's covering her face, but with her hands over her face, there's something so interesting there. Like, you want to see, but at the same time, I don't know if I'm analyzing it right. At the same time, you are not, you are only allowed to see what you can see, if that makes sense. So I don't know who decided which photo would be on the cover page, but I'm just interested on, in the selection of that particular photo to serve, as the cover image.
So the images were actually handed to Dr. Mariki, and they're the ones who actually went through the images and decide which images to go for. But I think the story with Koleka Class, I think it's much more powerful with her hands covering her face. Like I said, it's sort of like she was joyful because she was laughing at that time. Trust me, she wasn't crying or whatsoever. She was just joyful. And I think it was just a momentum thing. It was just at the right moment and at the right time. So yeah, the
I think
images were actually
what you
handled.
said is really interesting, that she was laughing. She wasn't crying. And it goes back to what Nonyedo said in the beginning, that we wanted to give dignity, and humanity to these people. And that also links with one of the things that Professor Pumla said in the epilogue of the book. I'm just quickly going to read, where she says that presenting the stories alongside photographs carefully chosen by the storytellers and sensitively taken by two young photographers, which is referring to both of you, our goal is to show agency, dignity, and humanity in the faces behind the stories of suffering told in the book. And I think that is incredibly, powerful, that, it's not just trauma. This is not like a glorification or valorization of trauma in a way, but a way to say that even in our trauma, there is even also beauty. There is, people are not like, they are not traumatized for life, and that's all there is to them. There is more to people. So thank you. So finally, I'm just going to ask, using Botswele's words, where he said that I am not old enough to have experienced apartheid legislature firsthand. I am part of the second generation, born in a time where I could only experience the effects of apartheid and see the result of the pain it inflicted on previous generations. However, I have experienced the repercussions of the form of institutional injustice that persists today. So my question is, and also linking with the question on intergenerational trauma, I'm very, because also Nonyedo also spoke about, the experiences of the women, related to the experiences of her mother in the 1980s Soweto, right? So what does it mean for you, being young, second generation or even 1.5 generation of apartheid survivors, taking images and also stories of people who had firsthand experience, this firsthand experience. What does it mean for you? And maybe to also tie it to the first question about intergenerational trauma, and also question of justice. So both of you can speak to this.
There I go. I'm good.
Toilet, do you wanna go first?
Yeah, cool. Okay, I think for me, right, I think it's very, very important for me to actually continue telling the stories through the images, right? Like I said, I'm not really into documentary, but going into this book, I've seen how important it is to actually tell our own stories. I think even in the field that I'm in right now, in terms of like editorial photography, I continue to actually tell our real stories. And I think it's good for the generation to follow, to know exactly what happened, and to see that it's quite important to tell historical events through images. Yeah. I don't know if
Okay.
that's
You are
answers.
muted, Nonyedo. Can you unmute yourself? Okay.
Oh, sorry. So for me, I feel photography is such a powerful tool to create or to destroy people. And we've been privileged to having people share their stories and opening up a wound that, you know, this is we're just scratching on the surface. So yeah, I feel like we have to take care and make sure that, you know, the way, like how we've started, it's done with care in a way that people find power in having told their stories and having been seen through our lens, and that we have done a bit of justice, because our trauma is, you know, it's not just the apartheid, but it's beyond that. So yeah, this is just the scratch on the surface. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say that photography is very central, you know, to the book, right? But even beyond that, I think that photography is also very central to intergenerational trauma, in the sense that many of us, we get to enter into that experience through the photographs that we see. And it reminds me of one of the, like, you know, most important books in intergenerational trauma, called Family Frames, you know, by an American scholar, which talks about how she entered into her parents' trauma by seeing photographs. So back to the question of re-traumatization, I think that this is what this book offers us, which is that, you know, we cannot escape the wound. We cannot run away from the wound, but we can sit down, you know, with the wound and to just use Nonyedo's word again, to find ways of thinking about different ethics of care, you know, and how to go about repair. So we cannot escape the wound. We just have to think forward. Yeah, and I will just hand over to Prof. Fumla from there. Thank you.
Thank you very much to all of you, to the facilitators of the conversation, Adibayo and Manosa, and thank you very much for your time, Butswele and Nonyedo, and for your insights in this work. You know, one of the questions that is sort of sitting in the background of this conversation is the question of the present. You know, we talk about transgenerational trauma as trauma that is passed on from the past. It's very much focused on the past. But what we have found in this work, and in fact, as recently as last week, when Mariki and I went to meet with the families, with the storytellers from Bonteheuvel and Langa, the question of the now came up, you know, that there is this heavy story of the memory that we carry from the past, individually and collectively. But what we should not forget, what we cannot forget, is that we are now in the hands, you know, we are now, you know, controlled by a government that is our own government, that is supposed to be caring for us. Our preliminary, in fact, overwhelmingly, we have seen, even though we have not analyzed the data, but our very clear preliminary insights from this conversation is that people are telling us that it's the now that matters. You know, it's the now that is traumatizing. There is this history that cannot be denied, but it's overlaid by all the betrayal of hope, the betrayal of the freedom that was supposed to be, as the younger generation was supposed to be now getting hold of the freedom that we actually cannot experience because our lives have have stagnated. In many cases, people said our lives have slipped back, and in fact, our circumstances are worse off than our parents' circumstances. So as we speak about this language of transgenerational trauma, we also have to think about what is the present, what is the impact of the present in the lives of people who have inherited this past. That how terrible is it that their lives have not changed. You know, their children who were born only in 1994, their lives have not changed. And as they say, in many of these cases, their lives are worse off than their parents' lives. And this isn't to say that apartheid was better. I think some people might jump on and say, oh, it means that apartheid was better. No, absolutely not. But what it does mean is that we expected so much more from our own. Our parents did not expect anything better from an apartheid government, but we have not got what we were supposed, what we were promised, or what we had hoped for. And having served on the Truth Commission, I can attest to this. You know, when we had the Truth Commission, we had a future imagined of a particular kind of future, a hopeful future. We are now at that future, and it's not what we had imagined it to be 25 years ago at all. And we've got to reflect on these questions of transgenerationality. What does it mean? I mean, when we create these spaces, these questions also have to be addressed. You know, are we talking about the past, the impact of the past, the ghosts of the past, or are we talking about shattered hopes in the present? And these are questions that should exercise our minds, even in terms of thinking about the language itself, the language of trauma, whether it is appropriate to continue using this language or whether we should find other ways. As you, the two of you know, we've been talking about this, you know, in other contexts. There is, we would welcome questions at this point, but since Melike wanted to complete a thought, I would like to invite you first, Melike, to complete that thought. There is an opportunity now. We have about 8 minutes. If you can take the stage and complete the thought, and there's a question from the Q&A that I will read as well. Melike.
Thank you, Pumla. Thank you for inviting me back. So I think I was started off my discussion with just the value and the importance of going through these narratives and paying attention to them and spending time with them. But and I think for me that forms part of the internal work of dismantling our own biases. But I see that as a motivating force for the external work that should happen, which I think is what you were referring to, the action part. And there I want to say that I think this is a very personal thing. I think as white people, we should be much more aware and engaged in social justice action. But I also want to say that sometimes the issues, particularly as you highlighted now, also in our context with our current government, sometimes feels overwhelming. So I think we should focus on our own spheres of influence, there where we have power, where we have control in our communities, in the boardrooms, in the institutions where we are active. I think there we can exert change and transformation, and to be encouraged by the small steps which will ripple out to larger steps and to societal change. I think that is important to not feel overwhelmed by the weight of the issues that are confronting us.
Thank you, Melike. There's a question here. It seems from Sisegom Kalipi. It seems to me that an interdisciplinary approach in revisiting our past and traumatic histories is useful. Furthermore, creative expressions, quote unquote, seem to be paramount in the process of healing. I would like to hear your thoughts on how we can use the interdisciplinary approach in finding interventions for healing from our violent histories and trauma. What lessons have you learned from this project in this regard? could any one of you answer the question or comment or respond in whatever way?
Well, can I?
Yes,
say
I was
something?
hoping you would. I don't want to be the only one speaking on this.
No,
Yes.
because I do think this interdisciplinary approach, and this is something that I found when I joined the research project, that it was already in place. And if I look at the unit, there are so many different, there's people from theology, people from the social sciences, psychology, the arts, drama. And I think it is because of the interest that the unit have in looking at not just one-dimensional solutions or one-dimensional platforms that could spur conversations. And this collaboration to get the website was also a collaborative approach, in the sense of getting the students on board from visual arts department. The drama department at Stellenbosch University was involved in coordinating the readers of the stories. And I think those collaborations are really important. And this interdisciplinary approach is very important if we want to consider the complexities of the issues that we are looking at.
Thank you very much. I've asked Dorothy. Dorothy Kalata, you are here. I can see you are here. Thank you, Dorothy. I've asked Dorothy Kalata. Dorothy is a clinical psychologist and a PhD student conducting a research on transgenerational trauma. Those of you who are South African and those of you who are from the other parts of the world may know the story of the Craddock Four. Dorothy's father, Fort Kalata, was one of the 4 men who were killed by the apartheid government. And in fact, the presence, when I saw that Dorothy is here, her presence reminds us exactly of this issue of the present moment, you know, how it is overlaid with the past and how her own family has been dealing with this question. So I invited Dorothy to perhaps comment and respond in whatever way that is on her heart. Dorothy? You are muted, Dorothy. Open the mic, please.
Yeah, I've just unmuted now. Good afternoon, everyone. I think it's very interesting, especially when I was listening to people speaking, and when a reference was made to the current situation, the present situation. I'm currently in Craddock, which is my hometown. And as we speak, let me first say what it is that I'm doing in the unit. I'm doing a study looking at an intergenerational narrative between us, the Craddock Four children, which I term the political orphans, and the Craddock Four widows, whom I refer to as political widows. And the interesting thing is that I'm currently at home alone because I wanted to be on this webinar. And my mother is standing as we speak in front of the municipality, fighting for rights, civil rights and social rights for the people, the community of Craddock. Because there's been problems with service delivery and there's been problems of corruption reported at the municipality. And I've been observing how she is really now taking up this role and constantly being reminded about the purpose and the cause, you know, for fighting for freedom. So it is not an ending story. It is not an ending trauma. It is not a trauma just to be able to sit with. However, it is a history that needs to be revisited, a history that needs to be processed, and a history that actually needs intervention And my work is looking into the past, of course, but that past is actually being used in the present, looking into the future. And the interesting thing, I remember someone asked, why should we often look back into the trauma? The interesting thing for me is that I'm starting to look at the concept of trauma. I'm actually using the concept of trauma, but I'm using this concept from an understanding that it does not have to be stagnant. It's a concept that has to be moved so that it can be able to represent something new and mobile and diverse within our communities, because all we have actually ever known has been exposure to trauma. However, we have been able to transcend above this trauma in different ways. And I am hoping then that by revisiting the narratives, which a lot of people often refer to as grand narratives of the TRC, that it can be very visible that there are also things that these families are still sitting with that are not even different from the stories of each and every second South African citizen and each and every person who has actually taken part in the book that we are actually busy discussing today. And thinking of images and pictures as well. It's interesting to find myself within the space now, because there's a lot of commemoration and memorialization that is also taking place at the moment. But that is so relevant, not only to the context of the individual, but to the collective context and the societal context. So for me, basically, our history is extremely important because it is looking into our collective trauma is extremely important because it is at the very same time our point of healing, and our point of understanding comes from that collective understanding that we have. And we then carry the baton together moving forward, because I think what everybody is actually striving for is healing. And what I've also really sort of started realizing is that healing, unlike the expected term of wanting, when we're talking about healing, thinking that it is an easy process, healing has to be difficult. Healing has to be processed. Healing, if we want to heal, we have to go back and we have to dig in and we have to do this wound work, so that eventually when we're reaching a point where we can say that we are healed, we can, in all honesty, be healed. So it's a constant process of moving forward and moving backwards at the very same time, but with an understanding that there is movement and there is a process that is actually taking place. I think I'm going to stop there for now.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. We are rounding up now, coming to the end of our afternoon together, but I do want to mention that this idea of really the fact that Dorothy's mother is marching in front of the municipality 35 years after her husband marched and was murdered has been reiterated by so many of the storytellers in this book. I mean, the person who comes to mind for me is Mrs. Esther Cenga, who talks about how she came to Cape Town to work as a domestic worker and came with her husband, and how she has witnessed over the years all of these problems since 1994. And she speaks almost weepingly about the tragedy of the present moment, and young people from Worcester, from Langa, Bothaville, who say the same thing, that, our lives we are living lives of insecurity. And one person last week saying, for us, it's not about race. The issue for us is not about race, but the issue is about how do we transcend this very difficult moment of a lack of a total absence of empathy from people who are in positions of power. These are the things that people are telling us, have told us in this research, and we have to pay attention to that, that it is, this past is critical, but, and it does, you know, it does have its legacies, and the legacies are even exacerbated by what is continuing in the presence. And so these, to end this afternoon for us, in fact, I'll give you, Mariki, a last statement to end our afternoon. But I want to say from my part that these digital creative processes that are intergenerational, that invite so many scholars from around, you know, our universities, but globally as well, because the platform is global. It invites other stories, similar stories, so that we can think together about how do we move from these really complicated political moments. We heard just this morning, last night, about the just unbelievably violent conversation between, you know, leaders of the world, you know, the debate between Donald Trump and Joe Biden, and how Donald Trump conducted himself. It's just unreal to witness that moment. And so to see that this is where we are politically. And so if we have at this moment, we're dealing with these traumas in communities such as the ones we're talking about, and on the global stage, people who are international leaders are acting in ways that are so obnoxious, in ways that just pull our hearts so low, that our hopes are so low, that if this, when we witness what is going on in the powers of the world, then we wonder what is going to happen to, you know, smaller countries when these are the people who are supposed to be the leaders of the world. And so these moments for us are opportunities for reflection by us as citizens, because it seems as if we should have no hope. We should not put our hopes on leaders, but rather on civil society to think about what it is that we can do as members of civil society. I will pass on the baton, the virtual baton, or virtual mic rather, Mariki, to you. And if you could just, and because you've done so much for us to have this exhibition at all, so I'd like you to give the last word, please.
Thank you very much, Pumla. And I'm also reminded just to thinking back again about people's responses. The one, well, I'm not sure if beautiful is the right word, but the one response at the Bonteheuwel launch, where Mr. Frederik Grootboom said, we no longer have apartheid, but we are still living in the skeleton of apartheid. What you were saying just reminded me of this. So I would like to end by sharing with you what our hope is for this new digital space. As you will notice that the name of the website is Through the Eyes of Survivors of Apartheid, Life Despite Pain and Suffering. And we are hoping that this space will become a holding space for such as the stories documented in first the book and now the exhibition. These are the things that sit with us. The digital space will contain stories of survivors of apartheid and how they managed to live lives of dignity and hope. But we would also want the space to become a repository of more stories and of more conversations. We hope that this exhibition will set the tone for more images, video, audio, artifacts, and other art forms that could generate and mediate productive conversations about the issues that we have just touched on this morning. So the stories that my colleague Nancy spoke about. We hope that this digital space would become a space for local conversations, but also global conversations. And the first of a next iteration of this space as a space for conversation would be the addition of the abstract comics and the animation project of the visual arts student at Stellenbosch University. And we are hoping for that to happen by the end of November. And we also hope to then share with you some preliminary results of a research project we want to only start in the next few weeks, to find out from the students who responded to the stories, what their responses, the responses that we can see in the process work, what does that mean? So I would like to invite you to stay with us on this journey to make this space a productive space, and that we hope that next year we would also be able to put on the physical exhibition that we initially envisaged, and that we will work together with more of you, and also with you, Bongani Ngijima, at the Stellenbosch University Museum, and with all of the other people who were so generously gave their time for this project, and to make this digital website happen. And I want to mention our website designer, Stephen Simons here, who until late last night was still making changes, was still changing things around. He played a big role in getting us where we are today. So I wanted to thank him specifically. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Until next time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much. Bongani, Butwele.
Thank you. Thank you.
Really appreciate it. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.